Hello, my name's Joe, and this is a video of my 2018 late December Coues deer hunt in Arizona. As I battle an extreme case of bronchitis, I do my best to find a special Coues deer buck. After waiting a longer than normal 5 months since finding out I drew this tag, opening morning is finally here. The first deer I was able to find was this young buck harassing a group of does. Not quite the buck I'm looking for this early into my hunt. A short time later, I was able to find another buck with a doe. Definitely a good looking buck, but still not what I'm looking for. For those of you that don't know, a late December tag is considered by many, if not most, to be the best Coues deer tag you can get here in Arizona, sometimes taking many years to draw. So while I don't really consider myself a trophy hunter, I'm going to try to hold out for as long as I can, hoping to find that special buck. Unfortunately, this buck just doesn't make the cut this early into the hunt. I continue glassing for an hour or two, only finding a few more does. At about 9:30, I catch movement way up the mountain. To my surprise, it's another buck with a doe. He definitely looked like a great buck, but I was having a hard time telling exactly what he was because his antlers kept blending in with the grass in the background. As soon as he cleared the grass, I immediately knew I really liked this buck, so I quickly got packed up and started heading my way up towards him. Unfortunately, he was in a very tough spot about a mile out with a 700-foot climb, and he was currently heading straight towards a very thick oak draw, the last place I want him to go. Sadly, I was only able to make it about a quarter of a mile before he dropped down into the thick oak draw. I decided to continue on up the mountain, and maybe, just maybe, I might luck out and find him again once I get up there. About 2 hours later, I finally reached the spot where I last saw the buck. I began combing over the thick draw, hoping to luck out and relocate this buck. The hours go by, and unfortunately by the end of the day, the only thing that was found was this small buck and a whole lot of nothing. Disappointed that I couldn't relocate the buck, I worked my way back down the mountain towards my truck. While I was working my way back down the mountain, I stumbled across this young buck working the hillside, trying his best to get himself a girlfriend for the night. This was now the fourth buck I was able to find today, showing interest in does. Normally, I don't see this much rutting activity until after Christmas, so needless to say, I'm starting to have high hopes for this year's rut. As I continued filming this buck chasing does around the hillside, I catch movement to my right. Little did I know that my day was just about to get even better. As I pull up my binos, this is what I see. Immediately, I'm hit with an extreme case of buck fever as soon as I see this buck in my view at 350 yards. At first, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that I wanted to shoot this buck. But the more I watched him, my mind slowly began to change. I just kept thinking about the big buck I saw earlier in the day. There was just something about that buck that I really, really loved. And with over 2 weeks to hunt, I decided to pass on this deer, hoping to relocate the other buck later on in my hunt. So I foolishly put up my gun and continued videoing this buck. Overall, I'd say I had an awesome first day. I saw a couple great bucks and plenty of rutting activity. Over the next 10 days, I continued hunting this same area in search of that special buck, but unfortunately, I just wasn't able to find him. Here's some footage of some of the bucks I was able to find during this time. I'm always amazed on how well these deer can blend in with their surrounding environment. There are 3 bedded bucks on this hillside. Can you find them? After taking a few days off for Christmas and not being able to find that special buck I was looking for in my original spot, I tried my luck in a new location. After about an hour hike, I get to one of my favorite spots and begin glassing. Not too long after this, I find my first buck.
First buck of the day. I can't tell exactly what he is, but there's a doe about 100 yards to his left. I don't know if he's following her or what's going on yet. Okay, I can see another buck. Oh, this looks like a good buck. He's heading towards that other buck. Yeah, I'm gonna have to shoot this buck if I get a chance. Right now, I guess I'm about 800 yards away. Looks like 2 does down there. And another buck coming in. Okay, there's the little narrow one. The first one I saw. Let's see what happens here. Oh, you don't like that. I think that's the bigger one. Unless this is a new deer. I think I'm gonna wait for him to bed down. He's not chasing those too much, but...
Little did I know at the time that waiting for this buck to bed was probably a mistake, because the buck continued to work the hillside for a few more hours before finally deciding to bed, which would have gave me plenty of time to sneak within shooting range. With all that being said, I continued filming this buck, waiting for him to bed, not knowing that he was going to stay up for as long as he did.
Okay, I lost that buck. Last place I saw him, we went down in those thick trees. Right in the middle of the screen, there's an opening. So I'm gonna sneak up closer, and hopefully he'll come up out of the bottom up on the hill. And I'll be close enough for a shot, hopefully later today. We'll see.
About an hour later, I find myself overlooking the last place I saw the buck. First deer I was able to find was this lone doe up feeding.
Doe up moving in that tree. Hopefully the bucks will come out soon.
Followed by 3 more doe, also up feeding.
Seeing at least 3 deer in there. And then there's one right there somewhere.
Shortly after finding that last group of does, I find a buck.
First buck since I sneaked up to him. It looks like they're finally starting to get back up. This guy is at 450. And the big one is directly up about 50, about 100 yards. His last place is on.
Just when I was about to give up on ever finding this big buck again, he finally shows himself, but only for a split second before heading back into the thick trees.
Okay, I just found that buck. I was glassing for about an hour, and he just walked through that clearing right in the center, working his way up and to the left. He's at 550 yards, but he's in this stuff right here. He can really easily escape if he went up this way and just go straight across in all the thick trees, and I'll never be able to see him. So hopefully that's not what he's doing. but we will see.
By the end of the day, I just could not relocate this buck, leaving me humbled once again and schooled by a big cagey Coues deer. With only 3 days left of my hunt, I decided to get a little adventurous and hike way back into a remote peak in my unit. 1,500 feet and a few hours later, I finally reached the top, hoping to find that big old buck, only to be greeted with some nasty weather. The fog and snow made it extremely difficult to do any glassing. My only real option at the time was to still hunt this area. I slowly crept through the fog and snow only to find more fog and snow. Eventually, I come across a big-looking set of fresh tracks, so I decided to follow them, hoping they'd lead me to the big old buck that I've been looking for. Unfortunately, all they led me to was a snowy cliff. I stuck it out as long as I could, but in the end, the nasty weather pushed me down off the mountain. The only thing I had to show for my troubles were 2 doe and a set of tracks. The rest of the day was spent at home by a nice hot fire. With only 2 days remaining, I decided to go back to the area where I began my hunt. I felt that this spot would give me the best chance for finding a decent buck. It took me close to an hour before finally finding my first deer at about a mile away. Luckily for me, it was a good buck. I continued filming this buck as he methodically worked his way up the hillside while trying to figure out the best way to get up on him. While still trying to figure out my best move, I noticed quite a bit of movement about 75 yards to the right of this buck. I point my binos in this direction and I'm pleasantly surprised to see another good buck. I never really got a good look at this buck. All I know is he was a shooter, and that I now have 2 shooter bucks within 100 yards of each other. The question now is, do I wait for them to bed or do I go after them? I quickly weigh my options and decide to pack up and head up the mountain. It was taking me a lot longer to get up to them than I thought it would, and I'm beginning to worry that by the time I get up to these bucks, that they'll already be up and over to the cooler north-facing slopes. As I top out overlooking the area where I last saw the bucks, my fears are confirmed. At 800 yards, I see both bucks heading up and over to the cooler north-facing slopes. More than disappointed, I sit down and reassess my situation. After going over all my options, I feel my best bet is to stay put and glass the surrounding areas and maybe be able to find a different buck or get lucky and have the 2 bucks come back over. Shortly after I started glassing, I was able to find a couple more bucks cruising the hillsides looking for love. By the day's end, these were the only 2 bucks I was able to find, leaving me schooled once again by the gray ghost of the desert. Well, just like that, I'm down to my last day. Whether I get a buck or not, I've had a great hunt. I've had plenty of botched opportunities that a more skilled hunter would have capitalized on, so I can't complain. Not long into my glassing session, I find a good buck. A buck that I've seen a few times already earlier in my hunt. While he might not have been a shooter earlier in the hunt, he's definitely a last day shooter in my book. So once again, I wait for the buck to bed and head up the mountain one last time. As I slowly work my way up the mountain, something catches my eye. At first, I think to myself, there's no way that's a deer. It just didn't look like a deer. But on the other hand, it also didn't look like your average tree, bush, or rock either. So to play it safe, I pull up my binos, and this is what I see. At a mere 123 yards, I have a good buck, seemingly unaware of my presence. The question now is, do I shoot this buck, or do I continue on up towards the bedded buck about 800 yards above me? I glass up to where I last saw the bedded buck, and he's still there. I look him over, then look this buck over. I look him back over and look back at this buck. Even though this is a good buck, I just like the bedded buck above me better. And in the end, my greed gets the best of me, and I decide to pass on this deer. As soon as the buck is out of my sight, I continue on up towards the bigger bedded buck.
Currently stalking some deer. Finger right under there. I'm probably about 500 yards, 600 yards from now. I'm trying to stay in the bottom here. We're super thick and hard to get through so they don't see me. They're definitely not going to hear me with all this wind. If they see me, they might take off. Would that be no bueno?
From this point on, I decide to put my camera up and concentrate solely on getting this buck. My plan is to drop into the bottom of this canyon and slowly work my way up to the peak across from where I last saw the buck. 30 minutes later, I make it to the top of the peak. I check the spot where I last saw the buck, and he's up feeding at 221 yards. As I'm getting ready to shoot this deer, I think to myself, I've got this. This is an easy shot. But unfortunately, this was not the case. Between the wind and a severe case of buck fever, I just could not hold the crosshairs consistently on the buck's vitals. No matter how hard I tried, I just could not hold still. I frantically search around for a place to shoot prone, with no luck. And this is when I noticed a nice big rock that looked perfect to shoot from, about 50 yards below me. So I slowly backed down out of the buck's sight and worked my way over to this rock. It doesn't take me long to get there, maybe 5 minutes. I get set up and begin looking for the buck. Immediately I find the doe that he was with, but no buck. I continue looking. I find another doe, no buck. Another doe, another doe, another doe, and still no buck. I spend the next 2 to 3 hours taking every piece of that hill apart, and nothing, not 1 inch of antler. Once again, I've been bested by the gray ghost. By now, the sun is getting lower and lower in the horizon, and with my head hanging low, I decide to do a hike of shame down off the mountain back to my truck, stopping every now and then to glass. About 30 minutes into this hike of shame, I find myself reminiscing on the hunt. The bucks found, the highs and lows, the lessons learned and forgotten, and the things that I should have done differently. Shortly after, I find myself oddly at peace with the outcome of my hunt. As I continue down off the mountain, trying my best to soak up every last second I have remaining on this hunt, I get a sudden urge to glass a cut about 500 yards in front of me, which appears to be out of the wind. Seconds after pulling up my binos, I see a deer up feeding. It's a buck, and with less than an hour left on my hunt, I decide trophy time is over and I start working my way over to this buck. I look down below me and there's a thick oak-filled drainage leading right up to this buck. So I drop down into this drainage and slowly start working my way up to the buck. I continue on up the oak-filled drainage, closer and closer, until I'm right underneath the buck. I relocate the buck and shoot a range, 118 yards. I chamber around and wait for a break in the wind, or my buck fever, whichever comes first. It's crazy how quickly a hunt can change. Just like that, I went from tag soup to steak dinner. Well, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you on the next one.